Prize for a feature story she wrote about her father being killed. Sorry. She was.
Don't go there yet.
I won't go there yet. But she was a finalist for feature writing for Pulitzer Prize. Okay, that's a big deal. And like I said, she paved the way for female journalists, and I'm very thankful to her for that. When I met her maybe 5 years ago, she inspired me then. I was a reporter for the St. Croix Avis, and Bonnie, you just moved here, right? And I interviewed you, and she just it was inspiring. And still to this day, even though I'm editor now, she still inspires me and keeps me going and is an inspiration just to hold on to those journalistic ethics and morals and keep fighting the good fight. So I'm really glad she gets to share some of her wisdom with you all today. So,
Thank you.
Bonnie.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and hello, St. Thomas. Welcome. I am really always delighted to speak with students. I have spoken at probably 200-300 universities around the world, but to be able to do so where I call home now is very important to me. I traveled during the course of my career to over 160 countries. Primarily, my beat was death and destruction. So I never really came to St. Croix because y'all didn't have a war. And if I'm not going to get shot at or blown up, it just wasn't going to be fun. I want to talk to you all today about something that I think is sorely lacking in the media today and has been going downhill for years. And I want to talk to you about the importance of why we need to bring this back. This is ethics, principles, and morals. And this applies to whether you're going to be a teacher, whether whatever career you're going to take on. You need to, by now, hopefully, have already adopted the morals that are going to be part of your character, your moral fiber. The reason this is important, especially for journalists, is because without a strong, responsible, and free press, there is no democracy, and vice versa. You cannot have a democracy unless there is a strong and responsible press. I think the founding fathers did a wonderful job on the Constitution. I think the folks who wrote the Bill of Rights did a great job. I just want to nitpick one little thing, and that's in the First Amendment. I wish they had written free and responsible press. Because in today's age, our media, our print, the media, the news media is free to be idiots. They're free to be irresponsible. They're free to be stupid. And they are taking full advantage of that. What we need is free and responsible. On the webpage, on y'all's webpage, which is, I think, very, very well done and very cool, I see that there's an article about the rules of journalism, which over the years have been called the canons of journalism, been rewritten many times because that's what journalists like to do. But the bottom line is the same. It's being fair, it's being unbiased, it's being responsible, it's telling the story as best you can without injecting your own opinion. Today it's really hard to tell sometimes whether a newscast is a newscast or whether it's infotainment. Morals and principles, if you're a journalist, this isn't like cafeteria style. You don't get to go through the cafeteria line and decide which principles, which morals you're going to put on your plate today, and then change the next day. You adopt them, you live them, they are part of your character, and it's not something you take off at night. This is something that you live 24/7 for as long as you're a journalist. And in my case, it took about 10 years after I retired before I actually went to a political rally, and I wasn't covering it, and I felt a little strange. I never, during the course of my career, signed a petition for anything. I love whales, and I love dolphins, but I couldn't and would not sign a petition to save them. Because in the course of my career, I covered stories with Greenpeace, or covered stories about the massacre of dolphins in Japan. If you have taken a side on something by signing a petition, you can't do that. I mean, you have to not only avoid conflicts of interest, you have to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest. Because if somebody thinks you feel a certain way, even if you haven't or you don't, that's just as bad and it's just as damaging. I also never gave money to a political party or to a candidate. I also never went to a rally. I also never bought Girl Scout cookies. Now that sounds funny. A lot of people giggle at that. But long before you were in school, an issue with the Boy Scouts went before the US Supreme Court. So you never know what tiny little action you might take today will put you in a position of conflict. Now, what I'll also tell you is even if you put on this suit of armor of ethics and principles that you then swear to uphold every day, day in, day out, you will be tested. You will probably be tested many times. And again, this applies to education or to, any other career. You will be tested. And at some point, you're going to be covering something or doing something that may go against your personal beliefs, but you can't let people know. And again, we have education students here. You may be teaching something that that's in the book. You may come across parents that who have beliefs that are strongly against what yours are, and it's not your business to be interfering with that. You're educating their students, their children. I want to tell you about the first time I was tested. I was 23 years old. I was a very, very rookie reporter with the Miami Herald. I had started out, and my office was still in El Miami Herald, the Spanish language newspaper, fledgling, had just launched. And it took about a year for the rest of the Miami Herald to realize I speak English as well. So my main beat was covering Hialeah, but I also carved out a niche, and my niche was Cuba. Because I had contacts with political prisoner families, with exiles, and through just hard work, I had a real network of information coming out of the political prisons in Cuba. These would be notes, tiny little notes written by political prisoners in tiny little handwriting. And when they would be searched, they would wrap them in paper and insert them in their anus so that they could hide them. Then when they'd have meetings with their family members once a year, they were able to smuggle the notes out, and the notes then came to me. And I was able to break open the situation of the horrible conditions of political prisons in Cuba. So one day there was a major story going to happen. And sort of the pre-story to this, and if you want to hear it afterwards when we do questions, I'll be happy to share it with you. But basically, I had attempted to do a story that totally blew up in my face, and I thought my career was over, but the executive editor of the Herald liked my moxie. And by the way, also in St. Thomas, for all of you, I'd like this to be a conversation. So if at any point you have a question, or you want to interrupt me, or you have a comment, feel free. Your First Amendment rights are very much respected by me too. If you get angry and want to throw a book or shoe at me, go for it. I'm fairly good at ducking, and I say fairly good because I didn't duck quickly enough once and got shot, and just want you to know it's not cracked up what it's supposed to be. It's not fun at all. Anyway, so I was summoned into the office of John McMullen, the executive editor of the Miami Herald. I had only been in his office twice in relation to the biggest story I didn't do. And I always, just going into his office, when you're summoned, I thought, what have I done wrong? I certainly have screwed something up. And he told me that he wanted me to cover this biggest story of the Miami Herald in probably 20, 30 years. And I was floored. I'm 23 years old. Looking out on the newsroom, there are 150 reporters with tens of years more experience. And it had to do with Cuba. And Miami Herald had a 3-person Latin American bureau. All 3 people had won Pulitzers. 2 apparently were on vacation. One's on vacation, 2 were on assignment. So of all the other reporters, he chose me. This was 1978, and it was the first time in almost 20 years that Fidel Castro was allowing journalists into Cuba. And he was going to be meeting with 75 exile leaders, and they were going to have a discussion. Prior to the meeting even happening, 4 or 5 of these exile leaders were murdered by right-wing Cuban extremists, exile extremists. So it was a very dangerous and controversial meeting where people were going to go to Cuba and actually discuss or have it was called a dialogue, but if you know anything about Fidel Castro, it was a monologue. And it was actually 2 trips, but just separated by 2 days, a week, 2 days, and a week. On the final day of the trip, Fidel Castro called a press conference. I'm in awe, because here were 200-300 journalists, the top journalists in the world. You know, Tom Brokaw, Dan Rather, Bernie Shaw, the New York Times, Washington Post, newspapers from around the world, and little old me, 23 years old. And I was in the front row, and Castro summoned us at 9, didn't start speaking until about 11 or 12 at night, and then just spoke forever. And finally, you know, he announced that he was releasing 3,600 political prisoners, and then started taking questions. And I had a question, because I knew the story better than any of my colleagues. I had been working on it nonstop from Miami. So I summoned up my guts to ask him a question, and I literally zoned out for about 15 seconds. And if he had said, we're invading, you know, the United States tomorrow, I would have missed it. Because I was just totally focused on getting the nerve to stand up and ask a question. And I put my hand up, and he called on me, and I stood up, and I said, Comandante, I spoke in Spanish, what about the 6 American prisoners, political prisoners? Are they among those who are being released? He burst out laughing, and the entire press corps burst out laughing. So everyone was laughing at me. So we don't have any American prisoners. And I stood back up, said, begging your pardon, here are their names. And I read off 6 names. They were Cuban Americans, they were US citizens. That ticked him off a bit. And he spoke, you know, to one of his assistants, who ended up being Ricardo Alarcón, who was head of the parliament for many, many years. And then he said, we'll get back to you, next question. At the end of the press conference, he put the microphone down on the desk, and I was standing, it was a table a little more narrow than this, and you know, we all were standing up, and he pointed at me and he said, Yo quiero hablar con esa niña. I want to speak to that girl. And I see him coming my way. I'm taking a deep breath. You know, no, he's not really that tall. He's not really that, trust me. He's not that tall. I mean, I'm 5'9", but he's not that tall, you know. But he started walking over, and I still to this day see in slow motion him holding his hand out to shake my hand. And I'm thinking, but I shook his hand. And that moment, I shook the hand of the man who tortured my father, had the blood drained from his body, and then, along with Che Guevara, had him shot by a firing squad. I was 5 years old. I shook the hand of the man who killed my father. And I knew in that instant that I was born to be a journalist. I was not there as Howard Anderson's daughter. I was there as a reporter for the Miami Herald. I was there representing the readers of the Miami Herald and all of their wire services. And he came up, Anderson. Ah, sí, Anderson. And then just to prod me, he said, how's your mother? How are your 2 brothers? How's your sister? And I said, están bien, comandante. I won't call him president because he's never been elected in a democratic election, but he is a comandante. I said, we are all fine, I said with a smile. And I kept staring at him straight in the face, you know, in his eyes. And he would look away on occasion. And he'd say, oh, you're speaking with a Colombian accent since you grew up in Bogota. Sí, comandante. And then there was a pregnant pause. And I knew that that was going to be my only opportunity to ever have the opportunity, the chance to say to him what he did to my family and the pain that we still live with. And the fact that he killed 20,000 people. But I also knew that the story would then end up being me. I couldn't do that. The story was not me. The reporter is never the story. So that, and in this pregnant pause, he looked up once or twice and he started to say something and he stopped himself too. And so it was an interesting moment. The pause may have lasted 10 seconds. It felt like minutes. And finally, he just held his hand out again and he said, "Thank you for returning home to Cuba." And he turned around and he walked away. And as he turned around, I actually felt pity. Because I wondered if all these deaths, if the people he had just released, and there were over 100,000 Cuban political prisoners, and a good 67,000 of them spent at least 23 years behind bars solely because they believed in democracy. I wondered if this ever weighed on him. And I just got a sense just from him that no. I mean, this is what happens with megalomaniacs. They don't have conscience. They don't have a conscience. They don't feel guilt over things like this. So that was the first time I was tested. And I want to share with you what it looked like. Standing next to me was the Associated Press photographer who took this picture. I don't know if... Take a look at the men.
Step up to the camera.
How's that?
Okay, so how did he know who you were?
For me to be able to even go, he had to approve my travel. And so not only could I not travel as a US citizen, he made me take out a Cuban passport because I was born in Cuba. So there was no way I was going to get in without his okay. But that's why you also see the men on the other side of him, between the two of us, his security people, who were just waiting for me to smack him,
They look ready for something.
to spit at him, to do something. And if you notice, I have a smile on my face because I was not going to let him see me. You know, and my knees were trembling, but they were below the table. But this, to me, I keep this in my little office at home. And whenever I feel, and over the years have felt, any twinge of, am I doing the right thing? I just look at that. And I say, yeah, if I could do that, I can cover any story. I can cover stories about religion or politics or just about anything. Because I have been tested and I was not found wanting. So at this point, I'll be happy to take questions. I can tell you about the story that blew up in my face. You can tell me. You want to hear about that one?
Yeah, blew up in your face.
I have a question before you start.
Sure.
How many times were you tested?
Oh. Hundreds of times. Hundreds of times.
Oh, okay.
I worked in the Middle East. I do have feelings about, what's happening in Israel. I worked there for many years. I was a correspondent in Beirut, based there during the Civil War. You know, that's where I was blown up in a car bomb, by the way, and had to be medevaced for surgery. It's hard to cover a conflict without knowing, how you feel. In 1984, I broke the story of the Ethiopian famine and the famine in Africa through sub-Saharan Africa. It was the first time the world had seen starving people. And Marxist government, once food started coming in, the Marxist government then stopped, refused to feed the people in Tigray and Eritrea. These were two regions that were fighting for independence. And as you know, Eritrea finally became independent. But when food started flowing to Addis Ababa, I was with the Tigrayan rebels, and we were watching as the starving people were trying to get to the border with the rest of Ethiopia, and they were being not fed. They were refused food. And then they had to walk all the way to Sudan. I saw thousands of people die of starvation in front of me. I had hundreds die in my arms, children, women, men. I watched it during the day if these people who were starving so much were walking to the, single lines trying to get to the border of Sudan where there was food from the International Rescue Committee and the International Red Cross. I watched the MiG fighter planes from the Marxist government come and strafe and kill them. So many of them would try to walk just at night. You think I didn't have real strong personal feelings? When you're seeing people starve like this and their government mistreat them, it was genocide. You bet. My stories, sure.
Sorry.
No.
How hard was it? Like, you had to produce a story when you met Fidel Castro.
Mm-hmm.
my dad.
Well, the editor of the Miami Herald, when he sent me there, you know, in that meeting, I said, yeah, but Mr. McMullen, you know about, he says, yeah, I know about that, but I also know that you have it in you to keep your personal feelings out of it. And I was writing front page stories for 2 weeks, and not one reader knew about my personal feelings. That's part of the training. That's part of putting on this coat of ethics and principles, no matter what. And was it hard? You bet. But it just, it becomes natural at some point. I mean, I struggled, but I managed to do it. It was not easy. But, you know, it also wasn't easy to try to put together a balanced story about what was happening in Ethiopia. But I did it. That's what you have to do. You know, you're covering all kinds of different things were in your heart. I mean, I covered Klan issues in Georgia. When there was a Supreme Court, there was a Supreme Court ruling with the Ku Klux Klan and you know, a group of protesters. And I certainly have strong feelings about that, but you wouldn't know it from my work. You just can't. It's not our job to give my opinion to you. It's my job to give you the information as best I can, balanced, as best I can, fair, as accurate as possible. Because my job is to inform you so that you can make the best decisions, you know, possible. So that you can choose how you wish to feel about a certain issue. My job is not to sway you with my opinion. And by the way, during all the years that I was a journalist, no one other than my closest friends and family knew what my party affiliation was, how I voted, or anything like that. I wouldn't go to a party and chit-chat about politics. If politics came up, I kept my mouth shut, or I'd go to another conversation about music or something. You know, you can always get in trouble with those things, but if you're a journalist, you can really get in trouble.
I have a question.
Sure.
Earlier, Professor Hammer stated that you were one of the founding people of the CNN. I think you interjected and said in Spanish.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. I was CNN's national correspondent, senior national correspondent, which is, you know, the top correspondent of the network, which was great because all I had to do then, all I got to do primarily were the top major stories. So Oklahoma City bombing, Waco, Olympic Park bombing, Pope trip, major disasters, and then I could also do documentaries on anything I wanted. So I did the first documentary, groundbreaking, on priest pedophilia, and got nasty looks from every priest I came across for the next few years. I did the first story on incest, which ticked off Oprah because I didn't know, but she was 2 weeks later coming out with her own big story about having been the victim of incest. And I was able to do anything. It was a fabulous job. This was what you get after, you know, 20 years of doing overnights, working weekends, covering city council meetings, and things of that sort. But Ted Turner asked me, he said he wanted to start a Spanish language network, not for the United States, but for South America, and he wanted it to be CNN quality. And so I was part of a core group of 3 people. We put together a 24-hour Spanish language network, CNN en Español. I hired 150 journalists from Latin America. I trained them. I got their visas. I oversaw the building of our newsroom in Atlanta. I even chose phone numbers, and to make it easy on me, the assignment desk phone number was my birthday, and just numbers that I could remember easily. And then I was managing editor and ran that network for about 3 years until I was then promoted to vice president of all 7 networks, in charge of hiring and training all on-air personnel and some off-air people too. But it was a lot of work. I aged, 10 years and 3. As managing editors will tell you, you don't have a day off. I actually did not have a day off I didn't have a single day off for 14 months. Not a single day off. To go from 0 programming to 24 hours with people who had never worked before for a 24-hour network, overseeing all news gathering around the world. So talking with our reporters or our stringers in India when Mother Teresa died, in London when Princess Diana died, France, everywhere. You don't get any rest. You don't get any rest. And in fact, your teacher's sitting here dying of the flu, but she's here.
What advice do you have for some of the students who'd like to pursue a career in journalism?
Well, number one, ask yourself why you want to be a journalist. Would any of you who are going to be journalists want to answer that question? Marquita, why do you want to be a journalist?
Marquis is our assistant editor, by the way.
Oh, okay.
She built the website.
Very nice job.
And you're on the spot.
I know, don't dwell on the spot.
You're fine, go ahead.
Why I want to be a journalist? Yeah, see?
Well, I want you to know, because that's the most important question you should ask. It's the first question you should ask in your career, and you ask it of yourself. Why do I want to be a journalist? I'll tell you the worst answer I've gotten to that question, and it would be tacky of me to say the university, but its letters are FIU. And I was vice president of CNN at the time. I was there doing seminars on ethics with their students. And while I was there, since I was in charge of, my department also hired all entry-level people for our video journalist program. And this is entry-level, where you're gonna run teleprompters, you're gonna take in satellite feeds, you really get a taste of network television news. But we also tell these people, this job will never, ever, ever lead to an on-air position. It just will not. I mean, we're gonna hire people with lots of experience, but here's a good way to get your, your feet wet. And this one, and so I would always take the time to, meet with and interview, 10, 15 students who were interested in the video journalism program. And one day I was sitting there and this woman came in, skirt up to here, expecting, I think, a man, hair done like this, makeup for tons, and, I could smell her perfume 10 feet away. And so she sat down and I asked her, I said, so tell me, why do you want to be a journalist? And her answer was, I want to be famous and make a lot of money. And I just, you could not come up with a worse answer for me. There is not a worse answer. And I just calmly told her that I did not want her in my profession and in my career. And that she would probably be best suited as an actress or selling shoes. I actually said that. And afterwards, by the way, I spoke with the dean of journalism, and I said, she's 2 months from graduating. Has nobody given her a clue yet? This is just not, and she's probably now an anchor in New York or something. That's the state of journalism today. This is like, to me, journalism, if you think you want to be one, then you really need to identify why. Do you want to inform the public? This is public service. Make no mistake. This is public service. You may not get paid well at all. You are going to work overnights and weekends. And for 27 years, I never had one New Year's off, one Christmas, one Thanksgiving, one Easter, one anything. I had none of those off, ever. I worked 6 years overnights before I saw the light of day. It's not easy. I say it's a calling, very much like the priesthood, only we have a little more fun.
Ms. Anderson, it's so funny you say that, because as you were talking, my father was a priest, and I was like, you sound like a priest. I mean, in terms of what you're
Yes,
saying,
yes,
and
the commitment.
like how you wouldn't inject your personal opinions, you wouldn't deal with politics, if you were in group settings, you reserve certain things,
And there are ethics and principles with the priesthood too. There are things they will not do. They will not give up anything from the confessional. These are personal ethics and also part of.
and a calling.
It's a calling. I have lived for 3 years without running water or electricity in Beirut. I've slept in places you don't even want to think of. When we're out on stories. Again, being shot, being wounded. Now, not everyone chooses to be a war correspondent. It really isn't for everybody. It's just as important to be a medical correspondent, an education correspondent, to cover technology, to cover, the space program. I mean, we need people with skills and information and desire to cover different topics. I just happen to really enjoy going around the world and shining what I call a bright light on darkness. You know, explaining what is happening in the Middle East, explaining what was going on in Ethiopia, you know, explaining, you know, just shining light on these things. I turned down the White House correspondent job. I turned down in 1983, 82 and 83, I substitute anchored on the Today Show about 100 times, and on Early Today, and Sunrise, and on Linda Ellerby's show overnight. Out of 100 correspondents, only 3 of us were women. One of them was Andrea Mitchell, who's still there. The other was Linda Ellerby. And, you know, they offered me huge 7-figure salary to go to New York and be the backup anchor all the time. But there were only 3 women. And so, you know, I was being offered the job because I was attractive, I was a woman. And I turned it down. I said no, I was still very young. I said, I want to earn my chops. I want to earn my reputation, and I don't want anything handed to me because I'm a woman and because I'm attractive. Again, that's part of the calling. You know, I want to earn my reputation and earn the respect.
Okay, I have a question now. You're describing a lifestyle of overnights and no holidays and traveling to the four corners of the world on horrendous assignments. Do you have any personal life?
No.
Do you have
I knew, I figured out that's where you were going. And the truth is no.
Is that the choice?
No, it's a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice. I mean, if you're going to do that kind of reporting, if you're working at a local TV station or newspaper, you know, you have an opportunity to have some kind of life. But if you're traveling, and I was on the road, I mean, I was based in Beirut. I was based in Rome, but still covering the Middle East. I was based in Miami, but every trip of mine to Latin America was minimum 17 weeks in a row. Then I'd come home for about 3 days and go right back, you know, into the war with the Salvadoran civil war in Nicaragua with the Sandinistas. I dated now and then, but I have never been married. I totally forgot to have children. It's like, oh no! And you know, there are times when I feel a little sad about that. But the truth is I wasn't put on this earth, I think, not this go-around, to be married and have children. I think this go-around was about public service, about if I did no other story in my career, do what I did for Ethiopia and Sub-Saharan Africa and the thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives I saved through my work, that was reason enough for Madi to have been born.
Yeah. So to get as successful as a female, would you basically tell females that, you know, it would be best not to have that type of lifestyle where you have children, family, if you really want to make it as far as you have?
No, because, no, I mean, again, if you're going to be working at a local station, if you're going to be working at a local medium, you know, it could be print or radio, I think it is possible to have both. And you have to be just real cognizant of hiring laws. They can't even ask you if you're married or if you have children or if you want to have children. That's none of their business, and it's as head of hiring. I mean, that's just a federal offense. They're not allowed to even ask you. You know, so you can do it. I mean, ask Stephanie. You know, she's doing it.
She would be a good person to ask.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
Off the top of your head, what wars were you a correspondent for?
What wars?
Yes.
El Salvador, Nicaragua, Afghanistan versus Russia, the Iran-Iraq war for 4 years. In one weekend, I saw Saddam Hussein's troops use mustard gas and kill 80,000 Iranians, and he was still denying that he was using mustard gas. The first Gulf War, the Falklands War, every war in the Middle East. I mean, everything happening between the Palestinians and and Israel for 25 years. Every war involving, Desert Storm, Desert Shield, everything except for the current one. Virtually every war. What else? Grenada, the invasion of Grenada, the invasion of Panama. That's one reason, as I said, I never got to come here because y'all didn't have a decent war.
Can I piggyback off of that?
I love bananas for a banana republic.
Well, wow. I went to a lot of places in Latin America. I just wouldn't be using that term. As a Cuban, I find it a little offensive, and I can tell you that now.
Some of our students were supposed to
Yes.
have questions prepared. We
This was in El Salvador, where there were leftist guerrillas fighting the slightly right-wing central government. And every day we'd get up at 6 and we'd just go out and find where the war was, where they were fighting. And on most days, one day we'd say, all right, let's go with the army this time. And then the next day we'd go with the guerrillas and be able to just shoot, what was happening in this conflict. And some days we were actually able to come back around and get both sides. One day when we were trying to do that, we goofed and found ourselves in the middle of a crossfire. And that's when I was injured. There were lots of oops. Many of my friends, there are 3 that I know of who died in Honduras, 3 journalists, including a friend of mine from the Los Angeles Times. I quit counting when 11 of my colleagues died and 3 died in my arms. This is not for the faint of heart. By the way, it's also when I get ticked off when people who really don't know what they're talking about say to me, you journalists all just slant the news. And I go, yeah, right. We're out there risking our lives, dying, being wounded and injured, just so that we can slant the news. And if they persist, they'll say, well, yes, everything, name any big story. And they'll say, yeah, you all just slant the news because you're all saying basically the same thing.
Could it be true?
Well, gosh, could it be that what we're saying is actually what's happening? But if I get really pissy, I say, you're right. I said, every night, we all get together and have some drinks, and we vote on how we're going to slant the news the next day. And then we all do it. And I'll say this with a straight face, and you just kind of see this look of...
Illuminati in journalism.
So, yeah. Yes?
How do you get the news back to the United States, especially in cases where the government in a foreign country is monitoring everything that gets in and out?
Great question. We find ways. For example, living in Beirut, the ground station was in occupied land occupied by Syria. So we would have to have one of our drivers drive 3 hours from Lebanon over the Shuf Mountains into Syria, into Damascus, and that's where we would satellite the story. In Iraq, this was during the Iraq-Iran War, and in fact, this was a story where we got video of the gassings. They had decided to take us because they said we had a glorious fight this weekend. We killed 80,000 Iranians, and they took us in a helicopter. And we're flying over the desert, and for 45 minutes, all we're seeing are dead bodies. And we're very high up. They land us in one area that they had cordoned off for about an acre. And there was the head of the Iraqi army. So my cameraman's working. Now, our cameras have really good lenses. So pretending to be shooting something right here, he was shooting off. And you would see that all the soldiers out, we couldn't see with the naked eye, dead ones either had gas masks on or were reaching for them or had them in their hands. Whereas everybody within the cordoned area that we were allowed to take pictures of had no gas masks visible. And every single one had a single bullet hole right in the forehead. So what they had done is gone around and just put a bullet in everybody's forehead to show us. Well, this was obviously staged. So I just, being that I can be a little bit pissy sometimes with a straight face, I went up to the general in charge of the Iraqi army and I said, General, I want to commend you and your troops. And he said, why? I said, I've never seen marksmanship quite like this. Just one bullet. Just one bullet. I mean, he just turned red and almost exploded. That's all I said, just one bullet in the forehead. That's amazing marksmanship. It's, I don't think did I answer your question?
Partly.
What was the other?
How do you get the news back?
Well, in that case, I'm glad you said that. Since we had this video, they had, and probably still do, censorship. And there was this woman who would sit in the feed station, and before you were allowed to feed anything out of Baghdad, she would review it. And anything she didn't like, she would hit an erase button, so you'd have all this hash, which also screwed up the shot in front and the shot after. So we would always tag on some additional footage for editing purposes if they did this. So this time, we knew that this footage would really, really, really tick them off because we had proof of mustard gas. So we took we took the tape off the cassettes and wrapped it on pencils, and we flew out of the country and on pencils and pens, which we had, you know, in our pockets and our purse and everything else, and that's how we got that footage out. Yeah. Once in Djibouti, there was a ground station. It was locked. The gate was locked, and there had been a civil war in Sana'a, and we had all this footage, and they were supposed to have opened up the gate so that we could go in, and they didn't, so we climbed over the fence. There were guard dogs. We ran like crazy. The door was open, unlocked, and you know, we just, my cameraman and editor, I mean, we just figured out, ran the equipment, called New York, and said, it's up on the satellite, you guys find it. You know, it's you know, we're shipping it out. So a lot of times you hand carry real sensitive material. Other times, you know, if you're able to feed it, you feed it. Nowadays with Skype and FaceTime and things of that sort, I mean, there's a lot of other ways. You know, it's a lot easier.
Question. If you could give some insight, when you watch the major news coverage around the world, and you were assigned to CNN International, you're Cuban, and you're assigned to South America. I noticed historically that the major news bureaus pay very little coverage to no coverage to the Caribbean unless somebody's abducted or killed.
Sure.
They don't talk about the everyday stories, government, politics, education, economy. We get no coverage. They cover all the other continents in every corner of the globe, but they pay very little attention to the Caribbean.
And very little attention now to Africa. Because of the financial situation, CNN used to have 4 bureaus in Africa, now they have 1. They used to have a bureau in Buenos Aires and in Mexico City. I don't think they have either anymore. They have affiliates in San Juan that they will get information from, but primarily it's 2 things. One is CNN International is lots of international news. CNN Domestic, for some reason, the idiots that be, believe that the United States doesn't care about international news, and that includes the Caribbean. I think it's absolutely wrong, and I write about that in my book. I think a good story is a good story, you know, regardless of where it is, and if it's told in a compelling fashion, you know, people will listen and will be informed. You know, I think now a lot of this is purely financial, but also just in the back of the mind that Americans don't care about international news, which I just think is pathetic. I did stories, I mean, I was in Beirut when the 2 U.S. embassies were blown up, when the Marine base was blown up. And I was reporting way back when about Al-Qaeda. Do you think anybody cared? No. Do you think, you know, what was happening prior to the World Trade Center? We were covering, you know, gavel to gavel stories of white girls who were being kidnapped or killed, you know, or the Peterson case. I mean, stupid things like that impact 1 or 2 people, you know, gavel to gavel coverage of these trials. And then all of a sudden, the World Trade Centers are blown up and everyone's going, who did this? And they're totally baffled because the news media let them down. You know, we're not telling them about what was happening, about anti-American feeling in the Middle East, about the various different terrorist groups who had vowed to hurt the United States, who had been blowing up the embassy in France and embassies everywhere. You know, the American public didn't know, and it was.
I just find it odd because militarily,
yeah,
the archipelago within the Caribbean is used militarily for defense purposes. And if we're good enough for military defense, why are we not good enough to tell our everyday story?
Well, again, is it a national story? I mean, that's one of the things I'll ask you. Is it a story of national importance? Do the people in Dubuque need to know about a murder in St. Thomas? Now, if there are 10 murders and it's a serial killer, that's one thing.
From a Homeland Security, we're considered the third border, so I would think that's.
Yes, but then what's the Homeland Security story that we've done? I mean, has there been a breach? Have they arrested a terrorist? You know, remember, unfortunately, people say to me all the time, why isn't there more good news? And I say, because that's not the nature of what news is. And we would be in such trouble if all you were hearing was good news. Because news, the nature of news is it should be something that's out of the ordinary. And if good news is out of the ordinary, then we are in trouble. So it's not just to say, you know, do more reports here because we are, you know, the territory and our border. I promise you, if a terrorist is caught coming in, that story will be on the network news and will be on the front page of the Washington Post. But because, you know, folks here are doing a good job, you know, is
Now,
that
when you look at
newsworthy?
Al Jazeera and Chinese Central News,
Mhm.
they are now paying attention to the Caribbean, not the American media.
That could be. That could be. I mean, again, what is their, you know, what is their agenda? I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Quick question. Top 3, top 5 sources of solid news as an educator, what would you look at? What do you trust? Who do you trust?
Diane Sawyer, ABC. I've known her for many, 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 many years. We worked together against each other in the Philippines. I find her to be compelling, and even when she was on Good Morning America, she didn't do stupid things that Katie Couric, for example, did, you know, on Halloween, dressing up as Peter Pan and flying through the air. And then you wonder why she had no credibility when she sat in Walter Cronkite's chair. You know, she was very popular as she's, you know, doing silly Good Morning, you know, Today Show. But Diane never did silly things like that. What's really funny is, you know, PBS and NPR. And what makes this funny is that when I started, we didn't trust them because they were, you know, they're government entities, you know, and supported by the government. And we wanted independent. But the independent news agencies now are all, you know, especially television, but also many newspapers are owned by major corporations who care only about the bottom line, about making money. About making money. Yes?
Professor Hanlon,
Yes?
there's another class that's supposed to come in, like, your stick is in it, so.
Okay, well, I guess we'll have to say goodbye to you guys for now. If you
Bye.
didn't hear before, make sure to submit your portfolios, links. Check out the class blogs for today, okay?
Okay.
All right,
Bye, thank
later.
you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We can keep talking in here for whoever, you know.
Yeah.
Let me just turn this off.
Was there any
Hi, guys, my thanks, Alex, for coming.
Was there any time, Ms. Anderson?
I'm sorry.
Was,
All right, you know what? That's all. I'm gonna sit here. That's all right.
was there any time that you thought it was documented from the story?
Break down and cry? I cry a lot. You know, when you see in Ethiopia, when you see people, you know, dying left and right.
So you had to keep a straight face?
Not really, honestly. You know, I did on camera, except for once when I was holding this baby, and this aired. I was holding a woman's baby, a newborn, and I was talking about this woman not getting any prenatal care, and that she was so starving she didn't even have milk, and the baby died in my arms in the middle of my stand-up, and I choked up. But I kept it in the story because, honestly, if any, I don't think most people are any, I don't want to say any, but I don't think most people are pro hunger and starvation. Every night on that story, for example, I would go into my little pub tent and cry. In Beirut, after some car bombs, I picked up a dead baby. When friends of mine were killed in front of me. Yeah, you know, you cannot be, you don't want to be doing this on camera, you know, but you're human. You're human, and if you don't, the interesting thing is for most of the years, for all the years that I was a war correspondent, this was before they figured that journalists can get post-traumatic stress disorder. And soldiers returning would get therapy. Well, in the space of 25 years, I had much more war experience than any U.S. soldier. Not now, not after the last, current war, but I did. And I had to do a lot of therapy. Make no mistake, I still have nightmares. Two recurring nightmares. One is about Ethiopia, and one is a fellow that I saw had his legs blown off in Beirut. And the story was meaningless in terms of the story. It was just indiscriminate firing. It didn't advance the story one way or another, and we just brought equipment away, picked the guy up, took him to the hospital. It's just, and I still have pictures of it, the image in my mind, and it's still very disturbing.
I was gonna ask you about cynicism, and how do you fight that?
The importance of what we're doing. You know, I could pull out the scripts that I wrote in 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, about what's happening between Israel and the Palestinians. And I swear to God, if you just change the names of some people, you could run the exact same story differently. And so it's frustrating sometimes that, look, we've done all this work, we've shined so much light on darkness, and what good has it done? Well, who knows how much worse it could have done. Maybe the status quo is better than going further down. It's just reminding yourself while you're doing this.
And that's why that first question was so important about, for everybody to ask, why are you doing this? Because there are gonna be those moments.
There are. I mean, I have to tell you, I could not have done anything else with my career. And you know how many people, I'm sure we all know people who hate their jobs every single day. Absolutely hate going to work. Well, I had some pretty awful days. But I felt blessed, and I felt, I still feel a great deal of gratitude that I had the opportunity to do this, to help people, and to educate people. Now, there were tough days, no mistake. And it is a sacrifice if you're going to go off and take a foreign course on it, whether you're a workforce on it or not. But look at the other side of it. I got to go to over 160 countries. I learned how to say, don't shoot me, I'm a journalist in 38 languages. I also got to, I learned how to say, can I have a beer, and where's the bathroom? But you have to remember, just the calling and how important your work is.
You said that you're retired now. Do you still do any form of journalistic work?
Every now and then I'll write an article, usually op-ed. Miami Herald has me write an op-ed piece now and then. The last one I did was first person, it was for the Herald. It was as Cuba, which was like 6 years ago, was celebrating Castro's birthday. And the editor of the paper wanted an article that, through the eyes of a Cuban American exile, explaining how it's hard for us to not be understood, how our opinion is not understood. So I do that. I've written a children's book that I haven't published. I keep screwing with it. I think I'm ruining it. I'll probably self-publish. It takes place in Buck Island. I mean, it's not journalism. In fact, what made it so fun is it was the first time I was able to make up stuff. Make up characters, make up names, make up quotes, make up situations. I have morals to the story. And I mean, I just had them all. I was just grinning away going, oh, this is fun. But, and then I teach almost every year now. I did for the last year in Brazil for a week, master's level journalism course on principles and ethics, and also on major story coverage. But, I'm not officially a journalist anymore, although it's just sort of a priesthood again. I say, what do you do? It's not, didn't just turn off the day I walked away from the last picture. Yes.
Why here?
Oh, it's a great question.
All over the world, so I'm just like,
I came over here, while I was doing CNN in Espanol, and I went all those months without a day off, I walked by one of our edit rooms, and the editor who's working on one of our travel stories, I walked by and there were all these beaches and all this stuff, and I said, where is it? Where do we go? Oh, man, I need a day off, I need to go to my beach. I'm Cuban, I'm West Indian. So I asked around, and I didn't want to go to Vegas, I didn't want thinking of nothing, and I ended up going to Culebra, and literally bought property there and built a house. So I lived there for 4 years, and about 5.5 years ago, I could see St. Croix on a clear day from my balcony there. And I had my boat, and I said, let's go check out St. Croix. And I happened to show up, there's somebody I was meeting here, and it was Jazz on the Waterfront, Frederick said that night, which to me was fabulous, because, you know, we can carry a tune in Culebra. Even the evangelicals, when they sing on, you know, in the evenings, cannot carry a tune. And so there was jazz, it was right in front of the Caribbean Art Museum, you know, it was heaven on earth. And then the next day I went to Kmart and burst into tears. I was so excited. I just thought, oh my gosh, this place is terrific. And I literally bought a house the next day and moved 3 weeks later. But what struck me even from those first 2 days is of all the places I've been in my life, I've never met friendlier people, more courteous and nicer people. You know, even, yeah, everywhere, and I became more courteous. I mean, first week I'd get lost and I'd stop at a gas station, I'd say, excuse me, can you please tell me how to get to, and I'll never forget, this woman took off glasses and she said, good morning. I said, I'll be right back. I walked outside, I walked back in, and I went, good morning. And, you know, when you walk into the post office, you walk to the doctor's office, no matter where you are, everyone turns around and says good morning,
Yeah.
good night.
That's
Walking down the street.
It's hard for us when we go to the States.
Oh, I love screwing. I was in New York twice this year, and I love screwing with the New Yorkers. Because I'll get in an elevator, and I'll do standing in line at Walgreens or whatever, and I'll say, good morning.
They just watch like they're crazy.
They turn around, and it just makes me laugh. So, and also the drivers. You know, you need to make a turn, oncoming traffic blinks and stops and lets you turn. You try that in Atlanta, they're gonna shoot you. You know, I kept, you know, looking around like, why is he doing that? You know, and so now, you know, like I always said, every time somebody does that for me, I'm gonna pay it forward 5 times. I never can, because everybody is good. But that's, I love living here. Everybody is wonderful. I love the diversity. You know, there are people I can speak Spanish with. There is Spanish language music here too. Libert is an old friend of mine. The culture, you know, incredible culture, music. I mean, you can go almost any night someplace to hear some great blues and jazz. The food is spectacular. The beaches are wonderful. I'm an avid fisherman, and we have, you know, I've got my boat at one of the marinas. The fishing is excellent. What's not to love? Guapo. Okay. Guapo. In fact, if I get another girl like I just did, I'm going to take my boat and fade Guapo. Pirate of the Caribbean. By the way, the most famous female pirate of the Caribbean was Anne Bonny. And I'm Bonnie Ann. Yeah, I'll pirate their butts. Yes.
A journalist or journalism student was to come to you and ask you to be their personal mentor.
I have mentored many. I taught a little journalism class at King's Hill School for some of the students there. If you're serious about it, you bet.
What led you writing a book?
I was just sick and tired of what was happening to journalism. I had left CNN not under the greatest of circumstances. I was actually fired because the new owners of CNN were ordering me to do things that were illegal. On page 1, 2, and 3 of my book, this is a guy who's in charge of all these CNN networks, who his history was in entertainment. And so I was showing him tapes of people that I wanted to hire for the different networks. Presidents of 7 networks would say, I have an opening for a medical reporter, or I have an anchor position, or this. I would go through thousands of tapes. I would bring them 5 or 6 of the best qualified people. And then they would choose one. And then we would bring them in and, you know, talk to them and decide whether or not to hire them. Well, all of a sudden, this guy running Turner Broadcasting decided he wanted to see. And it turned out that this day, of the 6 or 7 tapes I had, all but maybe 1 or 2 were minorities. And this guy said, why are you showing me all these minorities? We have enough of those people. That's in the book. I, of course, oh, really? And then he fired everybody over the age of 45 on camera. And he was dumb enough to send me an email, which I kept, that said, we only want to hire attractive anchors who project credibility. Project it. Because if you have credibility, that means you're a little older. So he talked about casting people, because he used to be in charge of entertainment, and he figured, we can have ER or doctor shows, and you just cast somebody to play a doctor. So we're just going to cast people to play journalists. And he even asked me, because I said, why am I showing you these people? Because they're good journalists. And then he said, what's a journalist? And I thought he was kidding. I turned around and started to laugh, and he wasn't kidding. So basically, I was being ordered to violate federal hiring law, and I refused. I told him, I'm going to continue to bring you the best candidates, regardless of whether they're skinny, fat, young, old, purple, green. These are going to be the best candidates in the world. They're compelling journalists. And I was escorted out by an armed guard.
Wow.
After winning a bunch of Emmys for them and starting CNN and Funny Home. So this book is not just sour grapes. I reveal everything that is illegal, immoral, and principled, and just plain stupid, but all of the networks do, all of them. I have friends at all the networks. Steve Croft from 60 Minutes, Richard Schlesinger for 48 Hours. I have friends all of the networks who gave me information, and so I wrote this book because journalists, especially the networks, love doing investigative reporting, and the newspapers too, investigative reporting. If they're looking into your business, they're looking into your, profession. But wow, did they not like it when I turned the light on our own. And not one of them would talk to me. I have a chapter on Fox, which I call the poster child for everything that's wrong with television news. And Bill O'Reilly didn't have the, I'll say guts, but you know where I was going. He didn't have the guts to put me on air because he knew I had it. I watched, I think, a week of his shows and came up with, I don't remember now, how many just factual errors, things that he just makes up. And that, if he thought he was going to out-yell me, I would out-brain him. I would just be very direct with everything. So I ticked them all off.
I noticed there's an exodus from CNN over to Al Jazeera in terms of journalists. What's
Al
going on?
Jazeera is actually doing a really good job. Al Jazeera is doing a very good job. And, everyone before was going, oh no, this is the Arabs and look at what they're doing. They're doing an excellent job. I was offered to head up their U.S. operations. But I was already living in the Caribbean and I just didn't want to go back. I gave 30 years of my life. I think I sacrificed enough. So a friend of mine.
Everybody's agreed.
Yes,
you did.
Yeah, I really did. But Al Jazeera is doing a lot better than you would imagine. They're in many cases, they're doing better than a lot of our own networks.
Coverage is very in-depth.
Yeah.
They're taking it.
Yeah.
They're telling the story.
They have earned their credibility. And they started out with just a horrible reputation only because Arab.
Do you prefer, which one, did you prefer when you had to write, or you prefer being on air? Which one did you prefer more?
Well, you always write. I write my own, every script I did for TV. It's a different type of writing. Yeah, no reporter has a script handed to them unless you're, an anchor at 60 Minutes. You do your own writing, you do your own reporting, you do it all. So it's, writing is a part of whether you're doing radio or television or internet or, newspapers. So it's a different type of writing, and I really stunk when I first got to TV because I was just writing inverted pyramid newspaper writing and say, just put pictures on it. And they were going, no, Bobby, that's not how this works. And my first stories would be 5 or 6 minutes long. It's like, no, that's just not going to work. And so it's a whole different style of writing. And it's fun though because you have pictures, you have natural sound, and you have sound bites, and then you have your tracks. So you're really able to get a lot across because people are also hearing and they're also seeing and taking information every which way.
So when you're at home, you have writing to do still too?
When I'm at home now, or
No, I don't know. If you're at home,
All local anchors for sure write all of their own copy. I mean, there will be there will be some writers to help out, especially with breaking news, but they're going to be writing a lot of their own copy that leads into stories. Reporters, if my story is going to be on air, then I suggest a lead-in, but the anchor people will often rewrite it. And I would say the same. I mean, there are writers also for the anchors on the networks, but they will always rework things so it sounds more natural. Writing for television is writing for your ear, not for your eye. That's the big difference. You'll hear radio reporters, for example, and I can just tell right off the bat they've ripped something, off the teletype or the AP or whatever, because they're trying to read something that's written as a newspaper article, and you just don't talk that way. I had my own media agency, and I've taught people, hundreds of people, and CNN, everybody, how to write for the ear and how to write for broadcast. We don't speak in complete sentences when we're on, on the radio or on TV, and we don't need to. A pause is good.
For the benefit of this generation.
You can't escape writing though.
Yeah, you can escape. That's it. And that is the most important thing, and that applies to whether you're a teacher, especially if you're going to be an English teacher, or you need to know how to write. Writing is the basis of all communication. So the writing skills are prime. That's the number one most important skill to have, writing. And in this day and age with spell check, I mean, if you ever send somebody a letter, an email, a text, a cover letter for a resume, and there's anything misspelled, I just toss it right out. Like, if you can't be careful enough, you're asking for a job to write. If your grammar is poor, forget it.
For the benefit of this generation, the culture of hard news is changing because of social media.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about how you see social media impacting hard news?
Social media is fabulous, but let's just remember it's not journalism. So just because it's on the internet doesn't make it true. Just because somebody tweeted it doesn't make it true. Just because somebody's got it in a blog absolutely does not make it true. But can it help point out what's happening? Sure. I mean, look at Cairo and Arab Spring. The journalists didn't just sit back in New York and take the tweets and report them, but they knew we better get our butts over there, and do the work ourselves. But it had a huge impact because it's also even cell phones, video that people are now able to get, and we are able to post instantly. Again, when the networks use it, it says this came from so-and-so. And sometimes images don't lie, but sometimes they can be distorted, or you don't know the proper context. Did this demonstration, what we just got video of, was it happening when the camera, before this phone camera was turned on, or was it a spontaneous thing with, there's an American-looking person and they're taking pictures, let's now rally. So you can't always trust even what you see. But what it means is that you're getting information faster than ever before. But what that also means is the journalists and the news organizations don't have the time to really double check everything. And so they need to still do it. Being first is not necessarily good if you're first and wrong. It's double checking, making sure that what you're about to report is accurate.
Is there anyone in this generation of news media that you would say actually carries that realism with journalism?
You mean at the age your age?
Yeah, this age of this.
Well, I haven't seen anybody actually working at your age. I mean, I don't know what your age is.
No, but I mean in journalists now that are
The younger journalists.
The younger generation. Is there anyone there that you actually see as carrying those morals and ethics?
I just haven't seen enough of the younger ones, and a lot of what I do see has a lot of opinion in it. I know Anderson Cooper, who's not, probably a generation between you and me, but I started to hire him, and then he took a job of being the co-host of a show called The Mole.
Oh, yeah,
that's
where I knew him from.
Yeah. And the moment I saw that, he had been anchoring the ABC overnight show, and he did fairly well. You know, he had really very little experience. He had been a reporter for a high school newscast. But I thought, all right, he has potential. And when I talked to his agent, found out he was doing The Mole, I went back to my bosses and said, forget it. Because once in my book, once you cross the line in entertainment and you're going to do how much credibility could he have if he's just been doing The Mole? It's like, being the host of Survivor, and then you want to go be a network anchor. Well, after I left, they hired him anyway. And by the way, The Mole was still running on another network, so you could be watching him do this silly, reality show, and then having him do this. And then they have him doing a talk show where I saw him giving away a toaster. Now, honestly, so, and when you go on his show, I believe I even have it in my book, or I've written about it somewhere. You listen to him, and it's, even the promos where, you'll get an opinion and you'll get this. I'm going, what? It might be seen as a new trend, but it's a very bad trend. The line between entertainment and news has to be strengthened once again. Even Barbara Walters is somebody I skewer, because you can't be 1 minute on 48 hours, no, 2020, and be anchoring, a newscast, tough-hitting newscast, and at the same time be an interviewer where you're telling, presidents, be kind to us, or ask, or agreeing with, celebrities and that kind of thing. Where is your credibility?
You mean on The View?
Well, that was even before The View. It was just her interviews, and now on The View, for the love of God, it's like, it's opinion. You take your hat off, and right now I'm going to give you my opinion, and then I'm going to be a solid journalist. No, so she really was hugely responsible for this blurring of the lines. She also, this ticked me off. Monica Lewinsky case. Monica's for the first interview, her attorneys asked, she was going to do it with Oprah, and her attorneys asked Oprah for a lot of money in exchange. And Oprah, who is not a journalist, said no, that she is not going to pay for an interview. So she's upholding higher journalistic standards than ABC did, because even though Barbara Walters did not hand the money over, ABC did. ABC paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to help pay Lewinsky's legal fees in return for Barbara being able to interview Lewinsky. Now that to me is selling out. To me, you just lose all credibility.
That's why I tell you guys, be careful with your blogs and what you put on Facebook.
Exactly.
Because you're taking the mystery away. Everybody knows now what your opinions are.
Yeah, and again, it can come back and bite you. Especially if you want to be a journalist, or employers are looking at Facebook pages and blogs and the photos. Careful photos.
So who's your favorite journalist?
Of all time.
Herself.
We all have big heads, but no. I really liked John Chancellor. I liked Cronkite. To a certain degree. Dan Rather was the biggest jerk on the planet, and he should have resigned over one particular story or been fired, and he wasn't. But his ego was too big.
What about Maxwell Robertson?
About who? Max? I liked Max. I liked Max a lot. He was a friend on top of it, and his death was really tough to take. And again, Diane Sawyer. Great respect for him.
Candy Crowley, we were just
Oh, Candy Crowley, I adore. I adore Candy
CNN
Crowley.
on Sundays, I still love. Fareed Zakaria and
Yeah, we've got
Candy
three.
Crowley.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah. But Candy, here's a woman who CNN almost fired many times when I was first a correspondent and then as a vice president in charge of hiring. Why? Because she's overweight. And I got really ticked off. And in these meetings, with presidents and vice presidents, I said, name one Capitol Hill reporter in any media who's better than Candy. And they'd be silent. Say, I rest my case. Just name one. She's the best. She's smart. She's hardworking. She's a digger. She's ethical. I caught her in one goof. This was when Sotomayor was being appointed to the Supreme Court. And I pick up the phone and I call her and she goes, oh crap. Because she was quoting, I think, Sotomayor's parents saying that they had immigrated from Puerto Rico to New York. I said, Candy, Puerto Rico is the United States, you don't immigrate. And she said, well, I was just kind of quoting the parents. I said, yeah, but you know better. So she actually went, back on air, changed her story and fixed that up. She's just, the sound of her voice, like, oh crap. Yeah, she knew better, but it was just, she's spectacular.
a good journalist.
She's excellent, excellent.
You guys should watch your show on Sundays.
In the matter of national security and journalism ethics, you have Edward Snowden, who just recently, at WikiLeaks, put stuff out there. How do you feel about it?
If I could get that information, and you know that it's legitimate, I'd report it. Depending on, is it going to cause an immediate invasion from someone else? At Waco, I knew from the third week, I knew exactly what was happening because I had made friends with the tactical forces. So I knew that there was a robot that went over there. I knew that when they sent milk into the children, they had microphones in it. I knew that they had a plane flying by constantly that had 3 different types of cameras that could detect exactly where everyone was. I knew that they had tanks retrofitted already to put in I knew all of this. I knew that they left the flagpole going so that the sharpshooters could tell the direction and strength of the wind. I had the whole plan week 3 and didn't say a word until the whole compound was in flames. Because it's also not my job to get people killed. So that's the responsible part. That's the part of responsibility. I was able, and I flew, since I knew so much, I'd been playing pool and buying beer for the tactical teams after my 18-hour day. And I had already had a reputation with the ATF and with the FBI of being a stand-up journalist, and that they could talk to me off the record from previous stories I had done throughout my career. So they checked me out, and they said, all right, this is what we're going to be doing. And so the day before they went in for the final assault, I flew home to Atlanta so I could anchor it, because I knew what time they were going to do it. And so I was, anchoring CNN all morning, and as it became clear that anything I said was not going to change anything, then I was able to explain all these things. That's the responsible part. But yeah, I'm sure somebody hands me documentation, trust me, news agencies have lawyers too. And, you report something that's not true, you get sued. Anonymous sources? Oh.